The air inside the grand hall was thick with expectation. Cameras flashed. Strings played a soft melody that once echoed through Kensington Palace, Diana's favorite composition. Guests whispered, journalists positioned themselves, and the world waited for a moment that had been years in the making. Two brothers, divided by time, pain, and scandal, were finally going to stand side by side again, to honor their mother. Or so everyone thought. But what happened next wasn't a reunion. It was a reckoning. Before we continue, please hit the like button, subscribe to the channel, and turn on the notification bell for updates. Prince Harry stood there, dressed impeccably in his tailored suit, clutching a small piece of paper, his tribute to the woman who had shaped his life. He'd spent weeks writing it, rewriting it, reading it aloud to Meghan late at night, perfecting every word that captured Diana's warmth, courage, and heartbreak. He believed, perhaps foolishly, that this moment could heal something, that if he spoke for her, maybe she could speak through him. But then, Prince William stepped forward. The audience quieted as the eldest son of Diana and heir to the throne approached the podium. His face was calm, too calm. Harry took a half-step forward, expecting a shared nod, a gesture of unity. But it never came. Instead, William turned, gestured towards someone behind him, and uttered the words that would change everything. "You won't be speaking today." For a heartbeat, Harry thought he misheard. Maybe it was protocol. Maybe the order was shuffled. But then William's expression hardened, his eyes cold yet deliberate, and he added, quietly enough for only a few nearby to hear, "You don't get to speak for her anymore." The hall seemed to stop breathing. A murmur spread through the crowd. Meghan's jaw tightened. The cameras zoomed in, trying to decode the frozen expressions. And just like that, the fragile illusion of royal reconciliation shattered in front of the world. Now, you might be wondering, what could drive one brother to silence the other, especially when the world was watching? What could make William, known for his restraint, make such a public and humiliating move? And why did he choose someone else, a distant royal cousin, to deliver the words meant for Harry? The answer begins long before that night, in whispered resentments, unspoken promises, and a legacy both brothers believed they owned. Because the truth is, this wasn't just about a speech. It was about who gets to define Diana's memory. Let's rewind. The lead-up to the Princess Diana Legacy Foundation ceremony had been carefully choreographed. Every detail was meant to symbolize unity. The press releases, the promotional images, even the seating chart placed the brothers side by side. Buckingham Palace insiders whispered that it was the perfect moment to show a family mending itself. But behind the scenes, there were cracks, deep, jagged ones. Harry had been in California for weeks, preparing what he called his final tribute to his mother, something deeply personal, from the heart, with no palace filters. He wanted to speak about her warmth, her compassion, her pain, and how her legacy had inspired him to live differently. He had rehearsed it on the flight over, telling aides, "This is my moment with her." William, however, saw things differently. To him, this wasn't about personal emotion. It was about protecting the monarchy, about ensuring Diana's image remained tied to dignity and duty, not rebellion and grief. He'd told his private secretary days before the event, "Diana belongs to Britain, not to anyone's brand." That sentence would become the defining line between the brothers. And so, quietly, in the corridors of Kensington Palace, decisions were made. The program was adjusted. A few calls were placed to the event organizers. And one change, a single, devastating change, was slipped into the schedule. Harry would no longer speak. Instead, a member of the extended royal family, a quiet, scholarly cousin connected to Diana's Spencer lineage, would deliver the tribute. The official explanation was protocol. The real reason was control. Harry found out hours before the event. An assistant brought him the printed program. At first, he thought it was an early draft. Then he noticed his name was missing. The line that once read, "Tribute by the Duke of Sussex," had been replaced with "Address by Lord Edward Spencer." He stared at it for a long moment before saying, softly, "You're joking." The aide didn't respond. She didn't need to. Imagine that, traveling across an ocean, preparing to honor your late mother, believing the day would be one of healing, only to find out your voice had been cut out of history. For Harry, it wasn't just a change in schedule. It was a betrayal. But here's the thing. The audience didn't know any of this. To them, The event was serene, beautiful even. The brothers entered together, greeted dignitaries, smiled politely for the cameras. Every flashbulb captured a lie, a portrait of reconciliation that was already burning at the edges. And when William stood at the podium, introducing the speaker, his tone was measured, almost gentle. "Today," he said, "we honor our mother's enduring spirit. She believed in service, in grace, in compassion." He paused, glancing briefly at Harry. A flicker of something unreadable passed between them. Then he continued, "And it is fitting that her nephew, a Spencer by blood, speak in her name." That was it. The execution sentence delivered under the guise of tradition. Harry froze. For a split second, he seemed ready to interrupt, to reclaim what had been taken from him. Megan's hand on his arm stopped him. She shook her head, eyes sharp with warning. And so, he stayed seated, silent. As his cousin walked to the stage and began to read words that felt eerily familiar. Phrases, metaphors, even anecdotes, all pulled from the very speech Harry had written. It hit him like a wave. The words weren't stolen in spirit. They were stolen in full. Someone had leaked his notes. The realization was slow, devastating. Every line was his. Every emotional beat was his. But it was coming from someone else's mouth, someone chosen by his brother. And William sat there, watching. The betrayal wasn't just public, it was personal. But let's pause here, because what's happening isn't as simple as brotherly rivalry. This was the culmination of years of tension, years of one brother feeling overshadowed and the other feeling betrayed. William had always carried the burden of monarchy, the expectation to be controlled, composed, calculated. Harry had carried the burden of emotion, of being labeled the rebel, the unpredictable one. Diana had loved them both fiercely but differently, and that difference had festered into resentment long after her death. You see, for Harry, speaking for his mother was redemption. For William, it was rebellion. And that night, those two forces collided in front of the world. The press caught on quickly. Within minutes of the event ending, headlines flashed, tense reunion between princes. Why did William cut Harry's speech? Diana's legacy sparks new divide. But inside that hall, what mattered wasn't the headlines. It was the silence. The kind of silence that follows heartbreak. Harry didn't storm out. He didn't argue. He simply watched. Watched as his cousin's voice echoed through the hall, delivering what should have been his farewell to his mother. Watched as William nodded approvingly. Watched as years of hurt condensed into one excruciating moment. And yet, beneath the humiliation, something began to stir. A quiet determination. He leaned toward Megan and whispered something. A single sentence that cameras couldn't catch. But witnesses say her eyes widened. She nodded once. Whatever he said, it wasn't over. Because Harry wasn't about to let his mother's memory be rewritten. Not by anyone, not even his brother. But here's the twist. That entire confrontation, the silencing, the substitution, the stolen words, wasn't spontaneous. It had been planned. Every detail, every cue, every camera angle had been decided in advance. And the reason behind it wasn't just royal protocol or petty rivalry. It was something far darker. Something that stretched back to Diana's last letter, to her warnings about what her sons might one day become. That letter had vanished for years. But soon, it would resurface, and when it did, the monarchy itself would tremble. Because inside that letter were words Diana had written in her own hand. Words neither William nor Harry were ever meant to hear at the same time. And when Harry finally read them, he realized why William had silenced him. But that's a story we'll reach soon. For now, picture the image that went viral. Harry sitting silently, eyes glassy, while his cousin stood at the podium speaking his mother's words. Behind them, the massive portrait of Princess Diana hung above the stage, her gaze caught by the cameras, serene, distant, almost sorrowful. It was as if she was watching them, too, watching her sons turn her legacy into a battlefield. And as the final applause echoed, Harry rose from his seat. Meghan followed. They left quietly, their exit unnoticed by the crowd focused on William's gracious handshake with the speaker. But the microphones, the ones left running near the stage, picked up something faint. Harry's voice, low and bitter. He's erased her. The sound technician thought it was static at first. It wasn't. It was the beginning of the storm. Because those 3 words would leak within hours, and when they did, the world would once again be divided. Team William. Team Harry, mother's love turned into modern war. And behind it all, a secret neither brother was ready to face. The truth about the letter. But before we get there, you have to see how it all began. With a single email that changed the course of the event and shattered what little trust remained between two royal sons. Because the betrayal that night didn't start on stage. It started days before, buried inside a message marked urgent, ceremony update. And that message? It came from someone Harry never expected. The day began like any other in the royal calendar, precise, rehearsed, and meticulously timed. Yet for Prince Harry, it was anything but ordinary. He had flown across the Atlantic with one purpose: to honor his mother, Princess Diana, at the prestigious Diana Legacy Foundation ceremony. This was the moment he had envisioned countless times in the quiet of his California home, pacing in front of mirrors, rehearsing every word, every pause, every emotional beat of the speech he had written with Meghan by his side. He imagined the applause, the solemn nods, the few seconds when he could feel his mother's presence in the room, validating all he had done in her name. But the day's first shock came not from the stage or the audience, but from a seemingly innocent email. It was sent early that morning with the subject line, "Urgent, ceremony update." The sender appeared to be a routine administrative contact from the foundation. Harry opened it casually, assuming it was the final itinerary or a note about seating. But as he scrolled, his heart sank. His name, which had been prominently listed as the speaker for the main tribute, had been removed. In its place was the name of a distant cousin, a spinster with academic credentials and quiet social presence, someone most of the attendees had never heard speak publicly, let alone about Diana. Harry read it twice, disbelief written across his face. This can't be real," he muttered, clutching the email with trembling fingers. He called Meghan immediately, whispering through the phone, "They've taken it. They've taken my speech away." She was calm but firm. Harry breathed. "We'll figure this out. There must be a reason." But deep down, Harry already knew. The reason wasn't procedural. It wasn't logistical. It was personal. What had been a straightforward honor had transformed into a battleground before the event had even begun. The palace insiders, the staff, the aides, everyone who had worked to make the ceremony seamless, had suddenly become actors in a quiet but lethal power play. Harry realized that the decision had not been made lightly. Someone had gone through the painstaking effort of rewriting schedules, adjusting scripts, and controlling every detail to ensure he would be sidelined. Meanwhile, the public narrative remained blissfully unaware. Press releases described a celebration of Diana's enduring legacy and hinted at unifying family appearances. Cameras captured William and Harry walking together into the venue, smiles on their faces, handshakes exchanged with dignitaries. The optics screamed reconciliation. But optics, as Harry was about to find out, were a dangerous illusion. Hours before the ceremony, Harry met briefly with the organizers. He asked calmly, though with an undercurrent of tension, "Why is my name missing? I've prepared this speech. I've traveled for this." One organizer avoided eye contact. "It's a last-minute change. A decision from the higher authority," she said, her voice carefully measured. She didn't clarify which authority. Harry's stomach sank. He could feel the invisible hand of William, poised and commanding even from behind the scenes, shaping the narrative. Harry retreated to a quiet corner, the weight of betrayal pressing down on him. He tried to calm himself. This wasn't just about public embarrassment. It was about control, about ownership of their mother's memory. Harry had always been the emotional one, the son who dared to speak about Diana's struggles, her humanity. William had always been the protector of the image, the heir apparent who polished and curated her legacy into a brand that could withstand scrutiny. He glanced at his notes one last time. Every phrase, every anecdote, every carefully chosen word, now meant to be spoken by someone else. The anger bubbled inside him, but more than anger, there was sorrow. This was not a misunderstanding. This was a declaration: you no longer hold authority over your mother's story. In the hours that followed, Harry attempted several quiet interventions. He called aides, tried to contact the event coordinator directly, even asked if a compromise could be reached, perhaps a shorter segment or a joint reading. Every attempt was met with a polite but firm refusal. "It's final," one aide said. "This has been decided at the highest level." The realization was crushing. The stage had been set, not for tribute, but for dominance. William had orchestrated a scenario that would humiliate Harry in front of the world, in front of the very people who were supposed to witness a brother's homage to his mother. The realization didn't just sting, it burned, and it was personal. Yet the day went on. Harry dressed carefully, straightened his tie, and rehearsed his expression. He would not show weakness, not in front of the cameras, not in front of William, not in front of the world. Meghan stayed by his side, offering quiet reassurances, her hand on his arm, her gaze unwavering. Together, they walked into the hall, maintaining the composed exterior that royalty demanded. As they approached the main seating area, Harry noticed subtle changes. His usual spot, the one closest to the podium, had been reassigned. His cousin, the one chosen to deliver the tribute, now occupied a prime position. The program in his hand confirmed it. The words were simple but devastating. Tribute delivered by Lord Edward Spencer. Harry swallowed hard. The audience, sensing the ceremony's gravity but unaware of the backstage drama, waited in hushed anticipation. Reporters clicked their pens, photographers adjusted their cameras, and the orchestra played Diana's favorite prelude. All attention was on the brothers, yet the tension between them remained invisible to the outside world. Harry glanced at William, standing confidently near the podium. There was a calculated serenity in William's posture, an almost imperceptible acknowledgement that the battle had been won before it even began. Harry's chest tightened. He wanted to confront him, to demand the truth, to assert his right to speak for his mother. But Meghan's steady hand reminded him of the consequences. Silence, she suggested. Silence would be the weapon, at least for now. The minutes dragged, each one a test of composure. Harry rehearsed his response internally, imagining every possible scenario. Could he interrupt? Could he demand the microphone? Would that escalate the tension or provide an opening? The uncertainty was paralyzing. Finally, the moment arrived. William stepped forward, microphone in hand, and began the formal introduction. The audience leaned in, expecting Harry's words, expecting a heartfelt homage. But William, with deliberate care, gestured toward his cousin. Today, we honor our mother's enduring spirit. It is fitting that her nephew, a Spencer by blood, speak in her name. Harry froze. Every muscle tensed. The betrayal was complete. The words were spoken with such calm authority, so polished, so public, that there was no room for debate. It was not only a professional slight, but a deeply personal one. And yet, as the cousin approached the podium and began reading the tribute, Harry noticed something chilling. Phrases, anecdotes, even entire sentences, they mirrored his own speech, his own painstakingly crafted words. Someone had leaked his notes. Every beat he had rehearsed, every emotional nuance, had been handed to another mouth. Meghan's eyes narrowed. Her hand clenched into a fist, but she remained calm, strategic, aware of the optics. The audience applauded politely, unaware of the storm beneath the surface. Harry's jaw tightened. He took a deep breath, forcing his expression into neutral composure, though internally, the pain was unbearable. And as the applause echoed through the hall, Harry's mind raced. He realized that this was not merely about speaking at an event. This was about narrative control. This was about legacy. William had made a statement. Your voice is no longer yours, and your interpretation of our mother's memory would not dominate this stage. The irony was sharp. All his life, Harry had been accused of impulsiveness, of acting out, of letting emotion govern him. Yet in that room, it was William, calm, composed, poised, who had executed the most calculated emotional strike against him. And as the ceremony continued, Harry understood something profound. The battle over Diana's legacy was not just symbolic. It was public, personal, and irrevocable. The stage was not merely a place of tribute. It was a battlefield, and he had just been outmaneuvered. But Harry was not done. Not yet. Something deep inside told him this was far from over. Because the betrayal had opened doors to truths he had long suspected but never confronted. Secrets buried beneath the polished facade of the monarchy. Decisions made in shadows. A story that was about to unravel, one revelation at a time. And behind it all, the letter Diana had written, the one she had sealed and entrusted to Harry years ago, whispered promises of truths waiting to be revealed. The day the program changed was more than a schedule alteration. It was the spark that ignited a firestorm, one that would expose decades of tension, rivalry, and unresolved grief. As Harry sat silently, watching his cousin deliver what should have been his words, he realized the stage was no longer his. But the story? That was still his to tell. And the audience, oblivious to the machinations behind the scenes, would soon witness the fallout, one that would shock the world, divide the press, and redefine the public perception of the royal brothers forever. Because the email marked urgent ceremony update was just the beginning. And what came next would change everything, and no one saw it coming. What does it mean to speak for someone who can no longer speak for themselves? That question haunted Prince Harry as he sat in the quiet room backstage. Long after the cameras had captured the polite applause, long after the cousin had delivered what should have been his tribute, and long after William's calm, controlled expression had sealed the public narrative. The words echoed in his mind. They weren't just rhetorical, they were the core of his struggle. Every breath he drew seemed heavy with the weight of Diana's memory, her legacy, and the unspoken battle over who had the right to define it. To understand the depth of the betrayal, you have to understand Diana herself. Princess Diana wasn't just a figurehead, a royal icon, or a media darling. She was a mother whose life had been defined by empathy, pain, and unrelenting public scrutiny. She was a woman who had loved fiercely and, at times, recklessly. She had taught her sons to see beyond the pomp of monarchy, to care deeply for those whom the world often ignored. Harry had learned from her the power of authenticity, the courage to break free from rigid structures when necessary, and the imperative to fight for what mattered, even when it was inconvenient, even when it angered the establishment. William, in contrast, had inherited a different lens. He had been molded by duty, expectation, and the relentless demands of a monarchy that survived on image and discipline. For him, Diana was a figure to be revered, yes, but also curated. Her legacy wasn't simply memory, it was a brand, a symbol of compassion wrapped in regal dignity. And in his mind, the way Harry spoke of her, with emotional rawness, with rebellion, with the messy honesty of grief, was a misstep. It was something that could tarnish the image Diana had worked so hard to cultivate, even unknowingly. This tension between raw emotion and controlled image had been simmering for years. Publicly, the brothers smiled, attended engagements together, and issued joint statements honoring Diana. Privately, Harry felt increasingly stifled. Every interview, every public moment, became a negotiation, a delicate dance between expressing the love he felt for his mother and navigating the constraints his brother and the palace expected him to follow. And now, the ceremony had crystallized the conflict in a single, devastating act. Harry thought about the hours he had spent crafting his speech. He remembered sitting in the dimly lit room of his California home, Meghan by his side, meticulously choosing every phrase. He had wanted to capture Diana's humor, her bravery, her unique way of connecting with people who felt invisible. He had wanted to convey the essence of a woman who had touched millions, who had reshaped the monarchy, who had loved deeply and suffered immensely. Every line had been a love letter, every anecdote a nod to the lessons she had imparted. And now, those words had been co-opted. Not by a stranger, not by an official, but by someone William had selected, someone distant, neutral, and polished. The speech was delivered flawlessly, yes, but the heart behind it, Harry's heart, was absent. And in that absence, the emotional truth was lost. Harry's grief at that moment was complicated. It wasn't just the pain of exclusion. It was the deeper anguish of feeling that he had lost his mother's voice to the very institution she had tried to humanize. It was the knowledge that the world, always eager for spectacle, would see a perfect, controlled tribute, and assume that it reflected the full truth of Diana's sons. And then there was the anger. Harry had always been accused of being impulsive, reactive, sometimes reckless. Yet in this moment, his restraint was deliberate. He understood the optics. He knew the cameras were rolling, and he knew that any outburst would be weaponized against him. But beneath the surface, a storm raged. Each beat of his heart echoed with questions that would not leave him. How could William, his own brother, orchestrate this betrayal? How could someone take his voice, his carefully chosen words, and hand them to another? Did William truly believe he had the right to decide who could speak for their mother? And in the shadows, Megan understood. She had seen Harry fight for his mother's memory for years. She had watched him endure public criticism, media scrutiny, and personal attacks, all in service of keeping Diana's spirit alive. Now, she was witness to a new level of betrayal, and she refused to let it pass silently. Her hand rested on his arm, grounding him, steadying him, a silent reminder that he was not alone. Harry's mind flashed to the moments of their childhood. Diana had been a complex mother, sometimes strict, often intensely loving, always human. She had pushed them to care, to feel, to act. And now, decades later, her sons were still under her influence, not through presence, but through absence. Her legacy had become a battleground. The tension was heightened by the public narrative that was already forming. Journalists, eager for conflict, whispered in the halls. Was this a rift resurfacing between William and Harry? Was this proof that reconciliation had been superficial? Was this the beginning of a public feud that would overshadow Diana's memory yet again? The questions circulated before Harry could even form his own response. And yet, the truth of the situation was more intimate than the press could capture. It wasn't simply a question of public perception. It was a fundamental question of identity. Harry had always felt that Diana's influence had shaped the core of who he was. Speaking for her was more than an honor. It was a way of staying connected to a mother he had lost too soon, a mother whose lessons he carried into every decision he made. Having that connection taken away, publicly and deliberately, was more than humiliating. It was a wound that cut to the very essence of his being. William, for his part, was unaware of the depth of the pain he was inflicting. Or perhaps he was aware, and it didn't matter. In his mind, controlling the narrative was paramount. Protecting the monarchy, safeguarding the image of Diana's memory, and ensuring that the legacy presented to the world was polished and dignified. These were the responsibilities he prioritized above familial sentiment. His calm exterior concealed the strategy behind the move, a demonstration of authority, a subtle but undeniable signal that Harry's emotional claim over Diana's legacy would no longer dominate the narrative. This moment, seemingly about a single speech, revealed the broader dynamic that had long simmered between the brothers. Harry represented vulnerability, rebellion, and emotion. William represented duty, tradition, and control. Their mother's legacy had become the lens through which these contrasting approaches clashed. And now, with a single email and a single change to the program, the clash had erupted publicly. As the ceremony unfolded, Harry sat quietly, absorbing every word. He noted the applause, the polite smiles, the expressions of attendees, and the glances exchanged between palace aides. Every detail confirmed the reality. He had been sidelined. His voice had been muted, his message redirected, and his connection to his mother, at least in this public moment, had been reassigned. And yet, even in the silence, a spark of determination began to grow. Harry understood that exclusion did not equal erasure. His voice might have been silenced at that moment, but his mother's memory, her lessons, and her love were indelible. They could not be handed to another, no matter how polished their delivery. And while William controlled the immediate narrative, Harry knew that the truth had a way of surfacing, often when least expected. He glanced at Meghan again, their eyes meeting briefly. There was an unspoken understanding. The story was far from over. The battle for Diana's legacy had just moved to a new phase, one that would test loyalty, courage, and the limits of public perception. And as the cousin delivered the tribute, phrases echoing Harry's own words, a thought crystallized in his mind. If his voice had been taken in public, perhaps it was time to reclaim it in ways that could not be controlled. The seeds of a response, a revelation, and a challenge were planted in that moment. For Harry, the weight of a mother's legacy was no longer just an emotional burden. It was a call to action. And while William might have believed he had silenced his brother, he had only ignited a fire that would grow beyond the walls of that hall, beyond the cameras, and beyond the carefully curated narrative of the palace. The day's events had started with a simple email, a change in the program. But it had set in motion a chain of consequences that neither brother could have fully anticipated. Secrets, revelations, and confrontations were now inevitable. And somewhere in the wings, Diana's own words, the letters she had left behind, the guidance she had written in private, waited to intervene. Harry didn't yet know how or when they would surface, but he knew one thing with certainty. This was not the end, not by a long shot, because the battle over his mother's legacy was only just beginning, and the world was about to watch it unfold. Of all the twists that night, nothing shocked Harry more than the identity of the person chosen to speak in his place. He had braced himself for William to intervene, to adjust the schedule, to manipulate the optics, but selecting a cousin? That was beyond anything he could have imagined. And not just any cousin. Someone connected to Diana's Spencer lineage, someone he barely knew, someone polished, precise, and impeccably trained to project grace and authority. It felt personal. The first time Harry laid eyes on him during rehearsals, the cousin seemed calm, almost serene. His posture was perfect, his suit tailored to perfection, and his expression neutral, yet commanding. He had an air of quiet authority, the kind of presence that draws attention without demanding it. On paper, he was the ideal choice, respected by the family, distant enough to avoid the messy politics of the course siblings, and yet intimately connected by blood. To William, he was flawless. To Harry, he was a reminder of what had been stolen from him. The decision to choose him hadn't been spontaneous. Behind closed doors, the palace had meticulously orchestrated every detail. William, aware of Harry's temperament and emotional investment in the tribute, wanted someone who could speak Diana's words without deviation, without faltering, and without revealing the raw honesty Harry would have inevitably included. This cousin was trained to deliver her legacy with controlled reverence, with just the right mix of emotion and detachment, leaving no room for personal interpretation. Harry's mind raced as he watched him approach the podium. Every step the cousin took seemed rehearsed, deliberate, a subtle choreography that mirrored the precision William demanded from everyone around him. And then, the first words left his lips. Calm, eloquent, precise, and Harry froze. Some of the phrases sounded uncannily familiar. The anecdotes, the turns of phrase, even the jokes about Diana's charitable missions, they were all words Harry had written, words he had practiced, words he had planned to deliver himself. And yet, they were being spoken by someone else, in someone else's voice, under someone else's authority. The betrayal was sharp. Not only had Harry been denied the chance to speak, but his speech, his effort, and his carefully crafted tribute had been appropriated by a member of his extended family. Someone he had trusted to represent Diana's legacy in a neutral, factual way had been co-opted into William's plan. Every word, every emotional beat, every reference to Diana's humanity had been sanitized, polished, and repurposed. Harry's internal turmoil was compounded by the subtle dynamics of the audience. Cameras clicked and whirred, capturing polite applause, smiles, and subtle nods. Reporters whispered into microphones, speculating about the reasons behind the last-minute change. Yet no one, not even the closest of Harry's allies, fully grasped the personal impact of the decision. To them, it was a minor programming change. To Harry, it was a deep, cutting betrayal. The cousin's delivery was flawless. There was no faltering, no hesitation. Every word fell into place like a note in a meticulously arranged symphony. And yet, that very perfection was what made it so devastating. Because it wasn't Harry's voice, Harry's heart, Harry's perspective. The emotional honesty that had been the hallmark of his tribute, the moments that would have made Diana's memory vivid and tangible, was now absent. Harry's mind flashed back to Diana herself. She had always emphasized the importance of voice, of expressing oneself fully and authentically, even when constrained by protocol or public expectation. She had warned her sons to use their voices wisely, to speak when necessary, and to ensure that the truth of their hearts was never lost. And now, in a cruel irony, the very lesson she had imparted was being turned against him. His voice, once his most powerful tool to honor her, had been taken and repurposed. And yet, the moment was also a revelation. Watching his cousin deliver his words, Harry began to notice the subtle ways in which interpretation could differ from intention. The cousin's measured delivery lacked the nuance of Harry's personal anecdotes, the humor, the vulnerability, the rawness that Diana had inspired in him. Each sanitized phrase highlighted the emotional gaps, the missing soul behind the words, and drove home the stark difference between performing a tribute and living it. Megan, seated beside him, leaned in subtly, her eyes reflecting both outrage and calculation. She understood what Harry was feeling, the simultaneous betrayal and opportunity. Because while his words had been delivered by someone else, the raw emotional truth, the pain, the honesty, the connection to Diana, remained uniquely Harry's. The public would see the performance, yes, but only Harry carried the lived experience, the memory, the grief that made every word genuine. And then came the subtle, almost imperceptible gestures. The cousin, in an effort to emulate Diana's style, adopted slight inflections and pauses reminiscent of her speeches. He cited anecdotes that were private, details that Harry had written after months of reflection, experiences that were intimately known only to Harry. The realization hit him. Someone had leaked his notes. Someone close enough to access personal drafts had handed them to the cousin for delivery under William's supervision. The implications were staggering. It wasn't just a breach of trust. It wasn't just a public slight. It was a full-scale intrusion into his creative and emotional process. The betrayal wasn't impersonal. It was surgical. Every carefully chosen word, every personal reflection, every homage he had written had been weaponized against him. Harry's mind turned to William. Was this orchestrated by him alone, or had the palace machinery facilitated it? Was it loyalty to the monarchy, a desire to control Diana's legacy, or a personal power play rooted in long-standing sibling rivalry? Every question spiraled, amplifying the emotional tension. And yet, beneath the hurt and anger, a quiet clarity emerged. Harry realized that while his words had been appropriated, his authenticity remained intact. The cousin could deliver phrases with precision, but he could not replicate the lived connection, the personal experience, the heartbreak, and the love that Harry carried in every syllable. Diana's spirit, the essence of her influence, was something that could not be replicated, no matter how polished the delivery. The audience, of course, remained unaware of the personal drama unfolding behind the podium. Cameras focused on the polished speech, on the articulate delivery, on the polite applause. To the world, everything appeared serene, dignified, flawless. But Harry's internal storm raged quietly, unseen, unfelt. Each word spoken by the cousin, each nod from the audience, each approving glance from William, compounded the emotional tension, sharpening the sense of betrayal. As the speech concluded, the cousin stepped back, smiling politely, bowing slightly, unaware of the emotional battleground he had been enlisted into. Harry's jaw tightened. Megan's hand rested on his, a silent acknowledgement that this was a moment of humiliation, yes, but also a moment of revelation. Because in that calculated substitution, Harry recognized the truth of the family dynamic. William had the ability to control public perception, to orchestrate appearances, to direct the narrative. But control of narrative does not equate to control of truth. Authenticity, emotional resonance, lived experience. These could not be staged, scripted, or reassigned. And as the applause died down, Harry felt a new sense of purpose emerging from the sting of betrayal. The cousin had delivered the words, yes, but he could not deliver the heart behind them. That heart, Harry's heart, was the one that had lived with Diana's lessons, that had carried her legacy in moments of struggle and triumph alike. And so, a silent promise formed in his mind. William could control the stage, the program, the optics. He could choose who spoke publicly. But he could never silence the truth, the authenticity, or the love that Harry carried for his mother. And somewhere, in the shadows of the hall, the seeds of the next confrontation were already being planted. The confrontation that would challenge perceptions, expose long-held resentments, and force the world to confront the raw, unfiltered truth about Diana's legacy and the brothers who claimed it. Because the cousin had delivered the speech, yes, but Harry had learned something far more important that night. While words could be stolen, the heart behind them could not. And what came next would test that truth in ways neither brother could have anticipated. The moment the cousin's voice carried Harry's words across the grand hall, a strange mixture of emotions gripped him. Shock, anger, disbelief, and, more painfully than anything, a deep, gnawing sense of violation. It wasn't just that he had been denied the honor of speaking for his mother. It was that the words he had poured his heart into, the carefully curated anecdotes, The private reflections, the moments he had lived with and for Diana, were being performed by someone else, someone who could never understand their true weight. As the cousin spoke, Harry could feel the emotional resonance of each sentence, and yet it rang hollow. He recognized the cadence, the phrasing, the very essence of the speech he had written with Meghan late at night, rehearsing in whispers while the rest of the world slept. Every detail, from the stories about Diana's charitable missions to the personal reflections about her humor, her wit, her vulnerability, was unmistakably his. And the reality of it hit him like a physical blow. Someone had taken his words. Not a mere copy, not a paraphrase. Every word had been lifted, edited only slightly to fit a formal, controlled delivery. It was more than appropriation. It was theft. Harry's mind raced. Who could have done this? The palace was precise. Protocol was sacred. For the speech to be intercepted and handed to another person, someone with access to his drafts must have been involved. The thought was chilling. A breach of trust? Yes, but also a calculated move to strip him of his agency, his emotional ownership, and his connection to Diana in front of the world. He glanced at Meghan, who sat beside him, her eyes narrowing as she followed the cousin's measured performance. She understood immediately what had happened. The subtle clues, phrasing, anecdotal choices, the timing of pauses, all pointed to someone close. Someone who had access, someone loyal to William. Harry felt a surge of anger. He clenched his hands in his lap, forcing himself to remain composed for the cameras and the audience. But inside, a storm raged. Every time the cousin delivered a line he had written, it felt as if he was being erased, word by word, moment by moment. His tribute, his connection to his mother, was being claimed by another, wielded as a tool of control. And then it hit him. The cousin wasn't acting alone. The palace had orchestrated this. William had known. William had approved. William had wanted this public humiliation. It wasn't about protocol. It was about power. It was about sending a message. Your voice, your interpretation, your emotional connection. It no longer mattered. The audience clapped politely at the end of the speech, and for a brief moment, Harry considered confronting William then and there. But Meghan's hand on his arm stopped him. "Wait," she whispered. "There's a reason. Don't make this public yet." So he remained seated, silent, as the applause echoed through the hall. But the silence in Harry's mind was deafening. The betrayal, the theft, and the calculated erasure of his voice weighed heavily on him. It wasn't just a professional slight. It was personal, deeply personal. As he sat there, Harry began to piece together the sequence of events that had led to this moment. Weeks earlier, he had drafted his speech meticulously. He had emailed preliminary versions to trusted aides, rehearsed it aloud with Meghan, and refined it until every line captured the essence of Diana's spirit. Every phrase was a reflection of his own experiences, his memories, and his emotions. Now, he realized, those drafts had been compromised. Someone had intercepted them, copied them, and handed them to the cousin. Every line, every anecdote, every deeply personal reflection had been taken without consent and delivered in a polished, detached performance that stripped them of their authenticity. Harry's mind flashed to past betrayals, past leaks, and past moments when his privacy had been violated. But this was different. This was surgical, calculated, public, intentional, and it was designed to humiliate him in front of the world, in front of the very people who had come to honor his mother. The emotional spike was sharp and immediate. Every time the cousin spoke, Harry felt his connection to Diana being usurped. Every nod from the audience, every polite smile, every camera angle capturing the performance reinforced the message: you are no longer in control. You are sidelined. You are irrelevant. And yet, beneath the pain and anger, a new clarity emerged. This wasn't just a loss. It was a revelation. The theft of his speech exposed the lengths to which William, and perhaps the palace itself, would go to maintain control over Diana's legacy. It revealed the silent power dynamics that had been at play for decades, the unspoken rules of loyalty, obedience, and narrative ownership. Harry realized that while his words had been stolen, his emotional truth remained intact. The cousin could deliver the phrases, yes, but he could not replicate the lived experience, the intimate knowledge, the deep love and grief that Harry carried. Diana's essence, the lessons she had imparted, the courage she had inspired, the compassion she had modeled, could not be performed. It could only be lived. And that realization sparked a quiet but fierce determination. Harry understood that this theft, this public sidelining, was not the end. It was a challenge, a provocation, an opportunity to reclaim his mother's legacy in ways that could not be controlled or scripted. The stolen speech became a symbol of the power struggle between the brothers, yes, but also a symbol of the resilience that Harry carried. While the public saw a polished performance, Harry held the truth in his heart. And in that truth lay the seeds of a response, one that would expose the manipulation, challenge the narrative, and assert his right to honor his mother authentically. But even as he sat in that hall, absorbing the calculated theft of his words, a chilling thought emerged. If his drafts had been intercepted, who had done it? Who in the inner circle of the palace had betrayed him? How deep did the network of loyalty and manipulation go? And was William acting alone, or were there others complicit in the silent coup against him? The questions were relentless, and the answers were hidden in shadows. Yet Harry knew one thing with certainty. The cousin had been a vessel, and William had chosen him deliberately, knowing that every nuance, every phrase, every line would be delivered perfectly, yet without the authenticity that only Harry could provide. As the event concluded, Harry's mind was already working. He would need to trace the breach, understand the logistics, identify the accomplices. But more importantly, he needed to prepare for the public fallout. Because the moment was not just private humiliation, it was a story that would inevitably leak, swirl through the media, and ignite debates across continents. And beneath it all, there was another layer of tension. Hidden letters, private messages, and long-forgotten notes from Diana herself, hints and truths she had left behind, were waiting to surface. They would complicate the narrative even further and could provide Harry with the leverage and validation he needed to reclaim his voice. But for now, the stolen speech had set the stage. It had revealed the silent war between the brothers, the lengths to which control could be exerted, and the emotional stakes that had always been at the heart of their rivalry. The event had been intended to honor Diana, but instead, it became a battlefield, a public theater of betrayal, and a reminder that legacy is as much about power and control as it is about love and memory. And as Harry left the hall that night, he realized the truth. The speech had been stolen, yes, but his story, his voice, his connection to Diana, his right to honor her authentically, had not. And the person responsible for leaking his notes? That revelation would shake him to the core, because it was someone he had trusted, someone who had once called themselves family. The stolen speech was only the beginning. And what came next would challenge everything Harry thought he knew about loyalty, family, and the very legacy of Princess Diana. Meghan's reaction to the unfolding drama was immediate, visceral, and impossibly precise. While Harry sat frozen, absorbing the sting of being silenced and watching the cousin deliver his words, Meghan was already calculating, analyzing, and preparing. She wasn't just a bystander in this scenario. She was his ally, his confidant, and the only person who fully understood the emotional weight Harry carried into that room. The moment the cousin took the stage, Meghan's jaw tightened. Her hand clutched Harry's arm, almost as if to physically anchor him, to remind him to remain composed. But inside, a storm raged. She had watched Harry spend countless nights drafting and refining this tribute, crafting it line by line, recalling memories only he could truly honor. And now, someone else was performing it under William's direction. She leaned close to Harry as the applause echoed through the hall and whispered fiercely, "They stole your voice. They stole everything you worked for." Her words were quiet, meant only for him, but the intensity in her tone left no doubt. Meghan had always been fiercely protective of Harry, but this was different. This was beyond politics, beyond optics. This was personal, and she wasn't going to allow it to pass silently. As the cousin concluded the speech, Meghan's mind raced. Who had had access to Harry's private drafts? Who had the audacity, the meticulous planning, to orchestrate such a public humiliation? Her instincts told her it wasn't a mere aide or an overzealous event coordinator. This had the fingerprints of someone deeply embedded in the royal inner circle, someone with knowledge, access, and loyalty to William. She kept her composure in public, but behind the scenes, she moved quickly. She discreetly intercepted staff members, asking pointed questions, probing for inconsistencies. Every answer was carefully measured, every detail controlled. She could see the fear in their eyes, the hesitation in their words. It confirmed what she suspected. Someone high up had orchestrated this. Megan's fury wasn't just emotional, it was strategic. She knew how the optics of the moment could be manipulated by the press, how headlines could twist the narrative, and how William's calm, polished demeanor could be used to overshadow Harry's silent humiliation. If Harry reacted impulsively, the story would be spun as another reckless act, a continuation of the impulsive prince narrative that tabloids love to propagate. Instead, she chose to channel her anger into precision. Every glance, every whispered word to Harry, every subtle gesture was meant to guide him through the immediate aftermath. She reminded him that the cameras were still on, that the audience was watching, and that every action could be weaponized. But Meghan was also thinking several steps ahead. She knew that the stolen speech wasn't just a personal slight. It was a breach that could have far-reaching consequences. Someone had accessed Harry's notes, leaked them, and handed them to another speaker. A calculated move that required trust, access, and the confidence that no one would notice until the performance was underway. Whoever did this had crossed a line. Meghan's mind raced through possible suspects. She considered the aides who had handled Harry's drafts, the communications staff responsible for the program, and even those within the palace hierarchy who had known of Harry's intentions. The network of complicity could be extensive, and the longer it took to identify the source, the more time William had to control the narrative and spin the event to his advantage. As Harry remained seated, absorbing the sting of betrayal, Meghan leaned closer again. Her voice was low, sharp, and unwavering. "We'll find out who did this. And when we do, they won't get away with it." Harry nodded, but the emotion in the room was almost suffocating. This was more than humiliation. It was a challenge to everything he had fought for in the past decade. Diana's legacy, his personal connection to her memory, the truth he carried about their family dynamics. All of it was at stake. Meghan's presence was a stabilizing force. She reminded him that even though the cousin had delivered his words, the authenticity, the lived experience, and the emotional truth remained his alone. No one could replicate the depth of feeling that came from having known Diana personally, from having been molded by her love and lessons. The intensity of Meghan's fury also had a protective component. She recognized that this wasn't just about Harry's emotional investment. It was about his public persona, his reputation, and the narrative that the media would soon spin. Every micro-expression, every whispered comment, every fleeting gesture would be scrutinized, dissected, and potentially distorted. Meghan's quick thinking ensured that Harry remained composed enough to navigate the immediate fallout, while simultaneously preparing to reclaim his narrative later. Behind the polished ceremony, Meghan's strategic mind was already plotting. She knew that the story couldn't be contained within the walls of the hall. The leak, the stolen speech, and William's decision to replace Harry with the cousin would inevitably ripple through the media. She began thinking about how to control the narrative, how to protect Harry's reputation, and how to turn this breach into an opportunity to assert the truth about Diana's legacy. And then there was the emotional component. Meghan's fury wasn't just strategic, it was deeply personal. She had witnessed Harry's devotion to his mother, the painstaking effort he had invested in honoring her memory authentically, and the public scrutiny he had endured over the years. To see him silenced and sidelined in front of the world ignited a protective rage that was almost tangible. Her fury was calculated. She didn't scream, she didn't storm out. Instead, she became a quiet, invisible force, guiding Harry through the storm, ensuring that every reaction, every glance, every subtle movement was measured for maximum impact, both personally and publicly. As the applause for the cousin's speech faded, Meghan leaned in and whispered again, her voice a mix of anger and determination. "This isn't the end. Not by a long shot. We're going to make sure the world knows the truth." Harry absorbed her words. For the first time since the betrayal began, a sense of purpose replaced the immediate sting of humiliation. He realized that while William could control the stage, the optics, and the immediate delivery, he could not control the truth. The authenticity, the emotional depth, and the lived experience that Harry carried were beyond manipulation. And Meghan's fury was the catalyst that would turn that truth into action. By the time the ceremony ended, the dynamics of power, loyalty, and control had shifted, if only subtly. Harry knew that the stolen speech, the public sidelining, and the calculated replacement were not just acts of sibling rivalry. They were acts of strategy, aimed at controlling the narrative, at shaping public perception, and at asserting dominance over Diana's legacy. But Meghan had seen through the plan. She had recognized the strategy, identified the potential networks of complicity, and positioned herself and Harry to respond effectively. The storm had begun, and she was ready to navigate it. And behind the fury, a silent promise lingered. This betrayal would not go unanswered. The stolen speech would be addressed, the narrative would be reclaimed, and the truth about Diana's legacy, unfiltered, authentic, and deeply personal, would be told. Because while William controlled the stage, Meghan controlled the strategy. And strategy, combined with Harry's lived experience and authenticity, was far more powerful than a polished delivery. And the revelation of who had leaked the speech? That discovery would rock Harry to his core, because it was someone he had once trusted implicitly, someone who had once called themselves family. The stage had been taken, the words had been stolen, but the fight for truth was only just beginning. And what came next would ignite a confrontation that neither brother could have predicted, one that would expose loyalty, betrayal, and the raw, unfiltered struggle over Diana's memory. The realization came slowly at first, like the faintest tremor before an earthquake. Harry had spent weeks crafting the speech that was meant to honor his mother, Diana. Words painstakingly written, rehearsed late at night with Meghan by his side, each sentence infused with personal anecdotes and deep emotional truth. And now, as the cousin spoke those very words from the podium, Harry's mind raced through the only possible conclusion. Someone had leaked his notes. At first, Harry tried to dismiss the thought. Maybe it was a coincidence, he told himself. Perhaps the cousin had written similar phrases independently, or perhaps the organizers had borrowed widely used quotes and anecdotes from Diana's life. But as he listened more closely, the evidence became undeniable. Entire sections, precise turns of phrase, carefully chosen analogies, subtle emotional beats, were lifted directly from his drafts. Every line bore the unmistakable imprint of Harry's personal touch. The magnitude of the betrayal hit him like a punch to the chest. Not only had he been silenced publicly, but someone he had trusted had stolen his voice. And not just stolen it, weaponized it. Every word he had written, every memory he had recounted, every deeply personal reflection was now being delivered under William's orchestration, sanitized and polished, devoid of the raw authenticity that had given them meaning. Harry's mind immediately turned to logistics. How could this have happened? Who had access to his drafts? He had emailed them to a handful of trusted aides, men and women who had long worked with him. Could one of them have betrayed him? Or was this an orchestrated effort, designed at a higher level, to assert control over the narrative surrounding Diana's legacy? He knew the answer, deep down. The breach wasn't an accident. It was deliberate, and it bore the unmistakable hallmark of William's strategic precision. Every detail, from the timing of the change in the program to the choice of the cousin as the speaker, indicated a carefully planned maneuver. This was about more than public perception. It was about control, hierarchy, and authority. Harry's thoughts turned to the palace staff. Weeks before the event, he had entrusted his speech drafts to aides who were loyal, discreet, and professional. He had assumed that those he trusted implicitly would safeguard the material. Now, that assumption seemed naive. Someone had deliberately taken the drafts, delivered them to the cousin, and ensured that the performance would appear seamless, leaving Harry humiliated in front of the world. Meghan, ever vigilant, recognized the gravity of the situation instantly. She whispered to Harry, her voice calm but firm, "This wasn't just about words. This was an act of control, and we need to find out who did it." Harry nodded, but his mind was already spinning with possibilities. Could it have been an aide acting independently? Someone seeking favor with William, hoping to earn recognition or advancement? Or was this orchestrated at a higher level, involving palace communications staff, protocol officers, and perhaps even members of William's inner circle? The thought was chilling. The consequences of such a leak were profound. Beyond the immediate personal humiliation, it revealed vulnerabilities in the palace's inner workings. the very systems that were supposed to protect the private communications and intentions of the family. If someone could access Harry's drafts so easily, what else could be intercepted? What other plans could be compromised? The breach was both a personal betrayal and a systemic vulnerability. Harry thought back to previous incidents, the leaks, the tabloid stories, the unauthorized publications.